Today the video is about which of these two pieces of equipment is not an instrument, and I claim they both are. This one here is what I've called a jazz box since the 70s, because it's a box and you play jazz on it. This was built by Jim Williams, a great Australian luthier who's now passed away, for me in 2005, and essentially it's a copy of a Guild Artist Award. So it's a carved arch top. That'll be just over 17 inches and just over, I don't know, just less than 3.5 inches deep. And essentially it's an acoustic guitar. And if I go to this other camera, I can slide a piece of paper underneath the pickup, demonstrating that the pickup is not actually in or pushing on the top, and nor is the scratch plate and the pickup, which is an electromagnet made by Kent Armstrong, wound by Kent Armstrong, is connected to the end of the fingerboard. And this end of the scratch plate has just got one piece of stainless steel rod, which allows it to push down on the actual bridge saddle. So nothing's actually touching the top. And if I come over here to the small camera and I push the top, you can see it actually moves, and you could break that off because it's carved. Now, if you get a laminated, Gibson 175 or Guild X150, they are many laminations, and the top doesn't move. You think it's solid, but it's not solid timber. It's laminated ply. They're still great guitars, but this thing here is essentially an acoustic guitar. So with a pickup, so because it's got a solid top, it'll probably feed back once you go over a certain volume threshold, and it does, especially on an A flat, so that all solid top acoustics are a little bit sensitive to being electrified type of thing, amplified I mean. So this one by itself, you can hear it is an acoustic guitar because it's not plugged in at the moment, except the strings are flat wound, and that takes a little bit of the oomph out of it and a bit of the volume and makes it a bit thuddish. But I got used to it. You could put round wound strings on it, but I have these normal jazz strings, and the first string, there's far less bending on the first string and the second and the third string, because the first string is actually a 13 thousandths of an inch, and the 13 is what a rock and roll player would usually have on his third string, and he'd bend that miles. But this is tuned to 6th up, so you can bend. Here's there's a semitone. You can bend a semitone. You can bend more if you want to, but it's not really a guitar for bending with these strings on them. So and all the strings are thicker, and the reason it is to get like a beautiful, when you're playing little chords at the top, you have a full tone of those chords that you can hear every note. They sound they sound out. So So it's pretty well an acoustic instrument by itself. So if I was to fly from Victoria all the way to 4,000 kilometres north to, Queensland, from East Gippsland up to Townsville or something, 4,000 kilometres, and it's freezing cold down here today outside, I wouldn't take that guitar because it's so sensitive. Likewise, this instrument over here is sensitive. If you drop this on the ground, you wouldn't finish the gig, and if you drop that guitar on the ground, you wouldn't finish the gig. But, just to set your mind at ease, if you had like a Guild 150, X150, and if I get that under the other, if I push that down as hard as I can, it hardly moves at all, and the pickups are actually into the top, so you can play it a bit louder. It doesn't feed back quite as much, but you can, they'll feed. And but it's acoustic quality. So this is a laminated guitar, good one, but you'd fly it anywhere in the world because it'll take it. They're more robust, and it's over-engineered. That first guitar I showed you, my guitar, it's 2.9 kilos. This thing here's, like 3.6 kilos, which is really heavy. But if you feel like if you dropped it and you didn't break a tuner off, you'd probably finish the gig. And plus it's got a triple laminated neck, which gives it extra strength. And the instrument that I retired 20 years ago when I got that first one was this Australian Maton GG22, which actually has got a solid top, but it's also highly over-engineered, strong, robust. It's a single-piece neck, but it's never moved, and they made one of the most beautiful thin rock and roll necks for a jazz guitar ever. And I got Jim Williams, the luthier, I got digital calipers and measured the back of this neck, and that first guitar I put up, it's pretty well got that same neck. So getting to this instrument over here, the Zenza Bronica GS for Grand Shooting 1. They made it between 1983, which was the same as that Maton I showed you, and the year 2000. And if I pull this, what you call a blind slide out, that's approximately the size of the negative. And like a jazz guitar, it's not much bending. I can't do that backwards and upside down. Like a jazz guitar, for me, there's not much bending involved, and things are a bit more sensitive, and you've got to set your tone on your amplifier like a combination lock just to get it right, and every room is different. So too is the light always different, and this thing here is fully manual, and you can just not speed this thing up. You can only go at a certain speed. Now sure, sometimes the pros would have these in a studio because they had a sync for all the shutter speeds, which was good. And if you're just only, by the way, it's fully electronic shutter release, and you have to turn the power on. And sure, and you've got to take a blind slide out before you take a shot. So, it sounds beautiful. Oh my gosh, listen to that. It's like, you've nailed it. And then, sure, you could get fast doing just winding it and taking a shot once things are set up. I'm not saying that you can't do things quickly, but it's not really for snap shooting. And really, I don't snap shoot. I use a tripod with this all the time. And they did make a device that would turn the 90 degrees so you could go from portrait to landscape. And this finder allowed you, so you look down there and you're in this mode, and then all of a sudden you go the 90 degrees and you turn the finder so you can still look down and get a different look on your negative. The reason I mention tilting the camera 90 degrees is you don't need the apparatus because all modern tripods have got a ball joint, and all you got to do is release the the knob and the ball joint will go over the 90 degrees, and you can easily put it back just by using the camera as leverage. Whereas one of the opposition companies, the Mamiyas, made a rotating film back. But for me, there's no problem in just using the tripod and releasing the knob and swiveling over the 90 and then back again if you have to. It's as easy as pie. So I love the size of the 6x6 negative, which is something like that cavity there, except I just didn't dig the there's the viewfinder. I just didn't dig the square. Like, I loved the increase of the data from a 35mm to a 6x6. So just here I have the negative carrier for so there's a 35mm negative carrier, and then a 6x6 would be something around that size. But when you go 6-7, wait a minute, I forgot. So you go 35, then there's 6 centimeters by 4.5, which is this camera here. That's the first time I went out of being a 35mm. There's 35mm. So 35mm to 6 centimeters by 4.5 centimeters, which is this camera. This is the little brother, the Bronica. This is the little brother of this one. You can see, like, there's a size difference. When I first drove this, it was the closest thing to, ecstasy of a jazz guitar. There's kind of like the size of its negative, and it pretty well works just the same as the GS-167. And I really thought that was the ant's pants. And when I saw 6.45 negatives, they were so much infinitely better than 35. And the 6.6, I haven't got a negative carrier that's 6.6, but this is a universal carrier, so I can make 6.6. Wait a minute. 6. Oops, touched it. There's 6.6. It's square. Oh, that's not square. I must have been a bit wrong there. That's square. But when it's 6.7, I know that in numbers it's not really that much bigger. But what happens? My whole life, because I've always had a dark room, when I framed into the viewfinder of after my first camera, the 1968 Praktica TL, fully manual, with a Russian Helios, I think it was a 48mm lens with great bokeh, and it was pretty fast. I think it was 2.8. When I dumped the negative onto the paper in the darkroom, I always had to crop. And I actually framed the negative. I framed the picture in the viewfinder of the camera. But 35mm doesn't really suit the ratio of the paper that you print onto. And so you have to crop. And I'd always take out like a tree or something that I actually thought was supposed to be in the final image. Now, of course, I could have figured everything out a lot sooner, 35 years ago or something, and figured, crop less in the viewfinder. But I thought the best idea was to put as much information on the negative as you could get on the negative, and I did. So where am I going with all this? Well, when you've got 6.7, you put the negative in the negative carrier, and here it is here, the very one. you put this in. When you turn the lamp on and it goes down the easel, you only cut a minuscule bit off, and the ratio suits the ratio of the paper. And so when by habit I frame in the viewfinder, I can then actually relate the negative size onto the paper. And that's why I love this. And this did it to a certain extent, except you're doing a bit of waste. But you're doing waste of paper, but you don't waste film, because I think I can get something like, you can get 15 6x4 on a 120 roll on this. You can get maybe 12 on a 6x6, and you can only get 10 on the 6x7. So the story with the 6x7 is I don't take as many subjects, because in case I scratch a negative or a negative fails, or usually in case I damage a negative, which, I've looked after them, but you can damage a negative. If you want that shot, you really got to take 3 of the same image. And then if you're only getting 10 out of a roll, that means you've got another 3 of another image, and then you've got 2 up, as backup. Is that right? 6, 7, 8. Oh yeah, maybe. Oh, that's right. You can do 3 different subjects, or 2 or something. So like, really, you don't go and do 10 different. Well, I don't go do 10 different things, because if I muck the negative up, or if it wasn't right to start with, well, you've lost the shot. So anyway, this is a modular camera, and modular means it comes completely apart, but it has interlocks in it as well. So the interlocks, here you can see there's the international symbol for the film plane, and then there's also a symbol there and a symbol there. You match those up because there's a tang on the bottom of the dark slide, and you slide him in because that tang connects with the camera, and you can take the back off. So you can't take the back off or take a picture unless you take that out. So, mechanical interlocks. So the other thing you do then is you wind it and make sure it's cocked, and then turn it off. You turn it off because when you take it to pieces, you don't want to cross the electrical connectors. And then she comes undone, and you've got your aperture ring at the end. Change the aperture, the shutter's in the lens as well, and your preview button is in there. Then the prism will come off, and you can see, let me see my finger at the back of the prism. It's a beautiful prism for its age, and there's 10 connectors there for the electronics, and then there's a single button here to release the back, and there's the size of the negative approximately, and then the cassette, the film cassette, once you open the back, is there, and what you're left with is a box, pretty well a box brownie, and you might be able to see the mirror, and it's gone down quite light then. So then you find the capstan, click it together, it sounds beautiful. Listen to this, fantastic. And then 2 tangs there, hinges, listen to this, rings like a bell. Then you put your lens on, snaps into place, and oops, and then perfect. Turn it to on, slide out, release the shutter. So you set up every shot. However, it does have an aperture priority, and that means you set the aperture and the camera will do a calculation to set the shutter speed. And it turns out, when I read the book, that the variance are even greater than in the shutter selector, because the variants are in 1/3 stops of a full stop. So you get 3 stops in between, a full stop. And the reason I mention that, because that's like an automatic feature, the reason I use it is because when I first learnt on a 1968 Praktica 35mm TL with a Helios, the Helios 58mm lens, it was great. After that, it was fully manual, absolutely fully manual. It did have a little light meter that ran by a button battery, and it was like a stick, and it was a stick in a circle. And if the stick was up, it meant overexposed. Down. If it was down, it was underexposed. If it was in the middle, it meant it was exposed. And it worked okay. So when that broke, I got a beat up Nikon F4, but I'd only ever used a fully manual camera. So the Nikon F4, which is this thing here, that's that fantastic sound that they sampled. That's that 5.7 frames a second. That's that sound they sampled for shutter sounds that everybody hears all the time. It had a priority mode, a shutter mode, an aperture mode, and a priority high mode, which were all were automatic, because even though it's fully manual, it's also fully computerized and motor driven. But I never used any of those because I'd only learnt on a fully manual camera. So I set every shot up. And the reason I loved it is it's about 1,200 grams, I suppose. Its mass density was that I could take a handheld at 60th of a second and the camera wouldn't move as long as I didn't move. And I could lean on something and put it on a tree or a fence and take a 30th of a second, because the thing is built like a tank. So I continued to do manual photography in 35mm, and everything else that I ever came up with. Another good camera is the Nikon 801S. Like back in the day, everybody who owned every pro, I wasn't a pro, but every pro who owned a Nikon F4 would have like a 801S as a backup. And quite frankly, it's nice and hefty, and it does a really good job. So, and they hardly cost anything these days, and they're usually in really fantastic condition because a Nikon F4 has probably run the shutter off 200,000 times or more, and maybe worn out. So when I got this thing and I realized, will I have a go of the aperture priority after having never done it in my whole life? I use it and I'm quite satisfied with it. And it's the only kind of modern technology, apart from these things had shutter sync at all speeds, but you've got to use their, the Bronica speedlight flash, which nobody, there's none of them left. So in any case, the sound of this thing and the look of it and the weight of it and the speed of it and the accuracy of it and the technology of it, and did I say look of it? This is just the closest thing to playing a jazz guitar. even though this little baby was, and it's not really little, but when I see a 6.7 negative, and you know how much data is on there, and I'm not mucking around, I'm not fighting with digital people. Like, I know you can get more, the truth is the quality of digital is greater, but like, I like to take it and I like to make it. And I mean, like, print, and like in the last 3 months I've printed 400 8x10s, and I'm getting my hand in to get up to 16x20s, and then I've got about 100 good images, and I'm going to print them up probably on archival paper. And I did buy the tanks for 24x20, but when I got delivered the 16x20, I thought, oh, maybe that's the size I like. And 16x20 fits in, I'm talking about inch prints here, so like 16, yeah, so there's 16 and there's 20, so where's 16? The table to there, so that's a good print. Anyway, that's the end. I could talk more. I'll have a watch of this and see if it makes sense. See you later.